As a companion to last week's Batrep that was not quite a Batrep, this week we present our very first Batrep from 12 years back. A real honest-to-God Batrep, if ever there was one. During the heyday of 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy, before the end times, we regularly played a great number of games at our club, the newly christened Japan's United Gaming Society, or JUGS for short. These ranged from 40k to fantasy to historical games, in particular bolt action, to a great variety of board games. Previous to this, we had been known as the Dream Dragon, named after a fellow founder's dog. When he returned to Canada, we felt that perhaps this name for the group kinda lost its relevancy though, so we changed it. As an aside, if you did some internet searching, there may well be some old blog posts from those times, hidden away somewhere still on the internet. Anyhow, with this renaming, we decided to do an inaugural battle report to demonstrate what we were all about. It was intended to be the first of a whole series of battle reports, although this didn't take place as it happens, more on that in the epilogue. For this first battle report, fellow founder JS took the reins and started a YouTube channel called UGS-Japan, which was the forerunner for our current channel. We decided to film a battle between my very own Lizardmen and that of fellow club member and good friend Mikhail, a veteran tournament player who had represented his home of Finland in numerous European events. He was playing Bretonnians. Suffice to say, I was a little out of my league, and I had regularly lost to him on numerous occasions. But each time I had learned a great deal, and so I was happy to pick up the gauntlet. I'm not one to give up. Thus did we begin in our usual fashion. We grabbed our books, dice, tape measures, models, and beer, and had at it.
And welcome to the first battle report brought to you by JUGS, Japan's United Gaming Society. We try to support both our Japanese and English-speaking viewers in our commentary and subtitles, so please be aware of this whilst viewing our videos.
Okay, now today I'm using Lizardmen. So this is the first unit you can see, which is a skink horde. My original idea for this 2,000 point game was to have an all skink army, but I just don't have enough skinks painted, so it's all turned into a almost all Saurus army. Now the skinks are good. We have a river on the board, so they're aquatic, and also with their poison javelins, they're great at taking down high toughness troops. Okay, I'll move on now to my general unit. This army is led by a Slan. He has 4 disciplines, so he's fairly tooled up and quite expensive. The Temple Guard basically acts as a bodyguard for him, and it'll keep him nice and safe. And also, in addition to that, I've chosen the hero character Chekax, who will also keep him nice and safe with lots of magic items. He's perfect for challenging and actually has to challenge if he gets into combat. The rest of my core are 2 units of Saurus, one with spears and one with hand weapons to get that parry save in. And that's my army for today.
Okay, so here are our Knights of Bretonnia again. Here you see a unit of 6 Knights of the Realm with a musician and a champion, which is also included. And another unit of Knights of the Realm, 13 Knights of the Realm with a BSB and the Prophetess of the Lady. They make up my core. And then I have a Bretonnian Lord on Pegasus. He's basically there to get more than 1 unit of Pegasus on the field. And here you see 3 units of Pegasus, 2 units of 4 and 1 unit of 3 Pegasus with full command. They are basically very mobile and brutal units against infantry. And here on the backside of the army you can see the 2 trebuchets to basically hit everything, huge boxes for Pegasus to attack them.
Well, as you can see, I've deployed my forces. I'm starting on the, what would be, from this point of view, the left flank. You can see my 2 units of Saurus. They're there heading towards the buildings, which I feel are quite defensible positions. As we move along, on the central hill, obviously on my side there was not a great deal of places to deploy. So on the central hill we have the Slan, and then and the Temple Guard. We also have the Skinks. Skinks are luckily river striders, so they should find no problem moving across the river, especially with their 6-inch movement. Hopefully that will give me some options against the Bretonnians. The Slan, this time as he is a Lore Master, has decided to take Law of Life. He's Lore Master, so obviously he's got all the spells there. Hopefully he should stop him, miscasting.
So here you can see my deployment. Most of my forces are on the left flank on that hill with 2 trebuchets. So I'm basically planning on dropping stones on Lizardmen and probably some spells from Lore of Heavens. I got both the Comet of Cassandrona and Chain Lightning. The Pegasus are basically there to be skirmishers and probably finding like flank charges and stuff like that against the Cyrus boxes.
And now we'll take a look at the Vanguard moves. It's only the Bretonnian player's Pegasus Knights that can Vanguard, so he decides to move them away from the Slan, hoping to avoid any first turn spellcasting. As many of you know, the Slan's magic phase can be devastating. You'll notice that some of the Pegasus Knights are only represented by bases. Our group's not so strict about the proxying rules, so we let it slide. And now here we go, Lizardmen turn 1. As you can see, this is a bird's eye view of our board. It has 3 large hills, a large river that dominates the centre of the board, and a group of buildings on the right hand side. The Lizardman player marches up all his units. The Slan moves up into a fungus forest which, although luckily he passes his stupidity test, means that it could cause some problems in later parts of the game. The 2 units of Saurus on the right flank are also going to have to cover a huge amount of ground in order to get into combat. Moving into the magic phase, and the Winds of Magic bring 8 power dice and 6 dispel dice. The Lizardman player wastes no time and quickly casts Throne of Vines. He got a total of 16 to cast, and the Bretonnian player then fails to dispel. He then goes on to cast Flesh to Stone on the Skinks, and again the Bretonnian player is unable to dispel it. And finally he casts Earthblood on his Slan's unit, but the Bretonnian player has no more dice left with which to dispel. And now here's Bretonnian turn 1. The Bretonnian player moves his Pegasus Knights and his General in an anti-clockwise direction around the flank of the Lizardman battle line. The Prophetess leaves the larger unit of Knights of the Realm and moves across to join the smaller unit of 6 Knights of the Realm to its left. The smaller unit reforms, and the larger unit moves forward slightly. The magic phase brings a meagre 6 power dice, and the Bretonnian player fails to channel. However, the Slan manages to channel 1 dice. Using all her power dice, the priestess then dispels Throne of Vines. And now we enter the Bretonnian shooting phase. The Bretonnian player has 2 trebuchets, which he targets at the Skink unit. If you think back to the Lizardman turn, the Lizardman player cast Flesh to Stone on this unit, thus nullifying some of the strength of the trebuchet. The first shot is a direct hit, managing to kill outright the Kroxigor that was actually targeted. Surrounding the Kroxigor were 10 Skinks, of which 3 actually were taken off as casualties. The second trebuchet shot scatters 2 inches away from its intended target. The second shot still manages to hit one of the Kroxigor and 9 Skinks. The Kroxigor fails its armor save and takes a wound, and of the 9 Skinks, 3 of them take wounds and are taken off as casualties. The Skinks then take a break test on their general's leadership of 9. Luckily they're cold-blooded, but they still only manage to pass on an 8. And now we enter Lizardmen turn 2. The Lizardman player reforms his Skinks to face the Pegasus Knights that are coming up on his flank. At the same time he moves forward all his other units in order to take some ground and bring them up towards the river. The 2 Saurus units on the edge of his battle line on the right hand side look like they're going to have difficulty catching up with the Bretonnian line. Coming into the Lizardmen magic phase, and the Lizardman player rolls 6 power dice. The Bretonnian player manages to fail his attempts to channel, however the Slan manages to pull off a 6, giving him an extra dice. The Slan then casts Throne of Vines on his unit on a roll of a 19. The Bretonnian player chooses not to dispel Throne of Vines, instead he chooses to dispel Regrowth, which was cast on the Skink unit and which he succeeds in doing. With no dispel dice left, the Bretonnian player has no choice but to allow Flesh to Stone to be cast on the Skink unit and Earthblood to be cast on the Slan's unit. In the shooting phase, the Skinks fire at the Pegasus Knights. The front rank scores 2 hits, whilst the second rank doesn't score any. Both hits wound 1 due to poison, and one of the Pegasus Knights fails both his armor save and his ward save, thus taking a wound. Okay, and here we are entering Bretonnian turn 2, and as you'll see in this turn, not a lot happens. The Pegasus Knights that were in combat last turn move back across the river, and the Lord on a Pegasus moves into the flank of the Skinks. The other 2 units of Pegasus Knights move around the edge of the board in an anti-clockwise direction, trying to keep their distance from the Slan. The large unit of Knights of the Realm moves slightly forwards, and the other unit of 6 Knights of the Realm moves slightly to its right. The Bretonnian player rolls 7 dice for the magic phase, giving 4 dispel dice to the Lizardman player. The Bretonnian player then dispels Throne of Vines. Then he decides to cast Chain Lightning on the Skinks, which was then dispelled by the Slan. Personally, I would have chosen to dispel Flesh to Stone. That would have given me better odds in the shooting phase. Moving into the Bretonnian shooting phase, and again both trebuchets decide to fire upon the Skinks. The first shot misses, however the second shot hits. One of the Croxagore takes 5 wounds from a direct hit. 9 Skinks are also hit by the blast, of which 5 die. The Skinks then have to take a panic check on a leadership 9, which they pass easily. Lizardmen turn 3, and the Skinks reform to avoid a flank charge by the Bretonnian Lord. The Slan's unit of Temple Guard moves to its left 2 inches, and the remaining Saurus units march up to try and get into a position of some use. As you can see, the river has proved to be a huge psychological barrier for both armies, who refuse to cross it with any unit that's vulnerable. The Lizardman magic phase brings 5 power dice and 4 dispel dice, with neither general managing to channel. The Slan then casts Throne of Vines on its own unit, which the Bretonnian player lets go. The Lizardman player then goes on to cast Regrowth on his Skink unit, which he succeeds in doing, but the Bretonnian player is quick to dispel it. In the Lizardman shooting phase, the Skink unit decides to fire its poison javelins at the general on the Pegasus. Half the unit are firing at short range, and half the unit are firing at long range. Out of all the shots, only 6 hit, but one of which is poisoned. And out of the 5 regular hits, only 1 manages to wound. The Pegasus Lord has a 1-up rerollable armor save due to the Gromril Greathelm, but he still manages to fail one of his armor saves twice. But luckily, the Lady's Blessing protects him.
Oh, blessing of the ladies!
And now we head into Bretonnian turn 3. The Pegasus Lord, the Knights of the Realm, and the Pegasus Knights all declare charges at the Skink unit. The Skinks stand and shoot at the large unit of Knights of the Realm, but cause no wounds. However, the Knights of the Realm fail their charge. The Lord and the Pegasus Knights both make their charge, and the other Bretonnian units just shuffle around the board. Okay, and moving into the Bretonnian magic phase, and the Winds of Magic bring 7 dice. On top of that, both casters fail to channel. The priestess then casts harmonic convergence on the unit of Pegasus Knights. The Lizardman player allows this to go through. However, the Bretonnian player then proceeds to cast Ice Shard Blizzard on the Skink unit, which he manages to cast. However, the Lizardman player manages to successfully dispel. The Bretonnian player finishes his magic phase by again dispelling Throne of Vines. In the Bretonnian shooting phase, both trebuchets fire upon the Slan's unit of Temple Guard. However, both shots miss and scatter wildly, hitting nothing. In our first combat of the game, both the Pegasus Lord and the Pegasus Knights pass their fear tests. The Pegasus Lord hits with all 4 of his attacks, and then wounds with 3 of them. The 3 Skinks fail their parry saves and are taken off as casualties. Next, the Pegasus Knights make their 7 attacks. Of the 7 attacks, only 2 hit, but luckily Harmonic Convergence allows him to reroll 2 of his missed hits, and so the number of hits totals 4, of which 2 wound. 2 more of the Pegasus Knights' attacks were allocated on the Croxagore, who only had 1 more wound left. One of the hits wounds the Croxagore and he fails his armor save and dies. One more of the Pegasus Knights who was left out of the previous attacks attacks the Skinks, managing to hit and take down another 3. Finally, the Lord's Mount attacks. It hits once, but fails to wound any Skinks. In retaliation, the Skink Champion attacks back, but fails to wound. 6 Skinks also attack back, and although 2 actually manage to wound, the Bretonnian armor manages to save 1 of them. The Skinks then have to take a panic check, which they pass, but only just. And that brings us to the end of the first part of the battle report. If you enjoyed it, please check out the second half. Thanks for watching. Okay, and welcome back to part 2 of our Lizardmen vs Bretonnians battle report. We're going to move straight into Lizardmen turn 4. The Lizardman player makes a series of swift reforms in order to change the facing of his units. As you can see from looking at the tabletop view, the majority of the Bretonnian army moved quickly away during the first 2 turns, leaving most of the Lizardman army alone and isolated on the right hand side. At this late stage in the game, it looks increasingly unlikely that the Lizardmen will actually get to see combat. Moving into the magic phase, and the winds of magic bring a huge 12 power dice. The Bretonnian player also fails to channel. The Lizardman player throws a handful of dice at Throne of Vines, causing an irresistible force and a miscast. The Slan fails to avoid the miscast and then suffers the magical feedback result. Both the Prophetess and the Slan took a wound, but neither were killed by the result. The subsequent power drain then prematurely ended the magic phase. In the combat phase, the Pegasus Lord does 4 wounds to the Skinks. One of the Skinks passes his parry save, but the remaining 3 are taken off as casualties. The Pegasus Knights and their mounts also target the Skinks. They cause 3 wounds and the Skink fails his armor save. The Lord's Mount then attacks, causing 1 wound, and the Skink fails his parry save. The Skinks then fail to hit with any of their attacks back, and are subsequently wiped out by the Pegasus Knights' stomp attacks. And now we enter Bretonnian turn 4. After annihilating the Skink unit, the Bretonnian player now decides to play the game safe by starting a mass retreat across the board back to his own corner. The Bretonnian player probably realised he can do more damage with his trebuchet than by attacking the large Temple Guard unit directly. In this kind of situation, it's hard to say whether the ends justify the means. The magic phase brings with it 8 power dice, and nobody channels. The Prophetess then quickly dispels Throne of Vines, and then fails to cast Comet of Cassandora. Into the shooting phase, and the first trebuchet gets a direct hit on the large Lizardman unit with hand weapons, and causes a total of 7 casualties as none pass their saves. To add insult to injury, the second trebuchet also gets a direct hit on the same unit. However, this time luck is not with the Bretonnian player, as he only manages to wound 1 of the Lizardmen. The Lizardman fails his save and is taken off as a casualty, and as always, the Saurus pass their panic check. Okay, I'm moving into Lizardmen turn 5, and first an apology, as some of the tabletop photos aren't actually accurate to this turn of the game. I had to take some of the earlier photos, although not much has moved, so you're not missing much. To put it simply, the Lizardman player is trying to play catch-up with the Bretonnians. The magic phase brings 7 power dice, and the Bretonnian player also manages to channel 1. The Slan then casts Regrowth on the Saurus unit with Irresistible Force. He rolls an 8 on the miscast table but avoids taking a wound, and this then ends the magic phase. We're now looking at turn 5, and for the Bretonnian player this was an incredibly uneventful turn. So uneventful in fact there's no footage. But basically what happens is he crowds more of his models in around the BSB in the corner while keeping out of range of the Slan. He also decides not to cast any magic or shoot in order to not give any victory points away. And here we are, turn 6. The Lizardman player desperately tries to move his troops forward to get his Slan into range. However, everything feels a little futile at this point in the game. The Bretonnian player has tucked himself safely in the corner, and it will be very difficult to get any victory points from him. The Winds of Magic bring 11 dice, but neither player manages to channel. The Lizardman player casts Throne of Vines, but it was dispelled by the Prophetess. He also attempts Dwellers from Below, but he fails to cast. And this brings us to Bretonnian's last turn of the game. As you can imagine from the previous 2 Bretonnian turns, the player was playing very cautiously, and nothing actually happened. He did risk a final trebuchet shot during his shooting phase, however due to the fact that none of the characters were taken off, he decided to call it a day. And that brings us to the end of our game. Based on victory points you could argue that it was a technical victory for the Bretonnians, but I would call it a draw. I'll leave you with the game's summary from our 2 slightly inebriated players.
Well, once again, I lost today. Essentially, it was a fairly close game, points-wise, although the dynamic of the game was not thus. The defining feature of the game for me was the fact that a river bisects, cuts the battlefield in half, and that dictated lots of the tactics that we used. Essentially, I lost a unit, and the Bretonnians, Mikhail, lost nothing. Thus, I lost. And that's fair enough, I lost. I don't know what I would have done that would be different. I think perhaps I need some pterodons in my Lizardman army. There we go.
So basically I was very underhand. I was losing all the magic phases because the Slan had very much more powerful magic phases. So I couldn't really go to the offensive because anything I can't kill in one turn would be like a terrible massacre because they got like all the buffs from the Lore of Life. Well, the defining points were the failed charge from the lance that kind of left out my couple of units out of combat and I couldn't get through the skinks in one turn, but the lucky, for me of course, lucky miscast from the slant helped me to regain the edge. So basically I tried to weaken a unit and then kill it away and just try not to lose points.
Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this battle report, please subscribe to our YouTube channel for more, both in English and Japanese.
This Batrep was originally released in 2 parts. It garnered much praise and subscribers for its clarity, style, look and feel. I do think JS did a wonderful job with the software and technology we had at hand to us back in 2012. However, for him, the process of creating a Batrep was so traumatizing in terms of effort, time, technical issues. For example, the exploding logo took literally days to process and render, that it all but swore him off making any further battle reports. Fair enough, to be honest. Years later, I decided to resurrect our YouTube efforts on a new channel. I began the YouTube channel as a place to showcase some of my own experiments in doing digital art. This was before AI-generated art was a thing. And then it became a place to put up some of the games that we were playing remotely during the COVID pandemic. and then somehow an old idea for a Warhammer history podcast snuck its way back into my psyche, and then finally onto the channel itself. The acorn of this idea had germinated in the end times, in the fallout of the end of Warhammer Fantasy in 2015. I had the idea of doing a history of the Warhammer world as a podcast, much in the way real-life history podcasters have done. I am a keen real-world history podcast listener, by the way. I began working on scripts, but eventually the whole idea had to go on hold, as I'd yet to come up with an original way of approaching it, and work, real-life work, at that point was strangling the life out of me. In 2016, I changed jobs, which at least removed that hurdle to the idea, although the way of approaching it took a lot longer to stumble across. Anyway, I can certainly attest to the amount of effort making videos entails, especially when you work and family commitments, but I'm a bit tenacious when it comes to seeing projects through to some sort of fruition, so I've yet to give up on this whole podcasting and video making endeavour. Our original UGS-Japan channel is, well, it's still there, it still exists here on YouTube if you wish to search it out. I'll leave some links in the video's description. Anyway, we hope you have enjoyed this little glimpse into our history.